everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. So today I am bringing you guys my weekly reading wrap-up. So for the month of October, I'm trying something different with my monthly wrap-ups. If you've been following me for a while, you would know that I normally do 2 wrap-ups per month, where I do a mid-month wrap-up where I talk about the books that I read in the first couple of weeks of the month, and then I do an end-of-the-month wrap-up where I, of course, talk about the books that I read in the last couple of weeks of the month. And I've just found that talking about 10 plus books in a single video is just too much for me. So with all that being said, this month I'm going to do a wrap-up every week. So of the 2 videos that I post every week, one of those will always be a wrap-up. I'm gonna see if this format works for me and if it works for you guys. I personally think it will, and it will also help with my sanity. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about all the books that I read from October 1st to today, which is October 10th. Now that is a little bit over a week, but that's because October 1st I think was on like a Thursday or a Friday. So I decided to just lump those couple of days in with this past week. So I have 8 books to talk about in today's video. I pretty much read a book per day this past week or so, and I have been reading some really great books. I am so excited to talk about all of them. So the first book I want to talk about is The Coldest Girl in Cold Town by Holly Black. This is a YA paranormal standalone book, and it is about vampires, as you can probably tell from the title and the cover. I was really excited going into this book because I am a Holly Black stan now after reading the Cruel Prince trilogy, so I really wanted to see what she would do with vampires, and I'm so glad that I did end up reading this book. So we have our main character Tana, and at the very beginning of this book, she wakes up the morning after a really wild party at this random person's house, but it turns out that she is the only person left alive after this party, and she quickly figures out that vampires must have broken into the house while they were having the party and killed everyone. But then she discovers her ex-boyfriend and this random vampire just in this bedroom in the house. So this is a really interesting take on vampires, because essentially vampirism was treated as a disease, kind of like a plague that spread throughout the world. There was this one vampire who decided that he wanted to turn as many people as possible, and so what the US at least decided to do was quarantine vampires into these cold towns. But the thing about these cold towns is that once you go into one, you can't really leave, and so Tana, her ex-boyfriend, and this vampire whose name is Gabriel, they end up going into the nearest cold town. But first of all, I loved that most of the characters in this book are morally gray. Holly Black seems to be the queen of that, because that is totally something that goes on in the Cruel Prince series. I also really enjoyed her take on vampires, not just, like I said, the way that the society treats vampirism and the way that it's viewed as like a disease, but also the way that humans can turn into vampires is very interesting and different. I also really liked the romance between Tana and Gabriel, even though we don't get a ton of it throughout the book. Also, the ending to this was very intriguing and interesting, definitely open-ended. So if Holly Black ever decided to revisit these characters in this world, I would definitely read it, because this world was very interesting to me, and I'm kind of a little sad that it's just a standalone. I did end up giving this 4.5 stars. The only reason why I didn't give this 5 stars is because the villain of the story, which I don't feel like going into all of that, but he just didn't blow me away. Like, him as a character, I thought he was just like a little blah and like didn't add too much to the story in my opinion, but I still really enjoyed this, and I definitely recommend this if you're looking for a vampire romance that's just a little bit different. Alright, the next book that I want to talk about is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. This is of course the book that the very popular movie starring Will Smith is based off of, but the book is very, very, very different from the movie. To me, they are almost completely different stories. So the book is about this virus or plague of some kind that has taken over at least the country. I don't know about the world, but everyone has been turned into bloodthirsty vampires. And now that I'm thinking about it, the plot is kind of similar to the last book I just talked about. But yeah, this is a very short book. It's actually only 150-ish pages. Our main character is Robert Neville. He is one of the only people in his area that he knows of that hasn't been infected. And so most of the book is definitely his inner monologue, and it's chronicling him kind of like fortifying his house against the vampires, and towards the middle of the book he starts to do his own research because he really wants to figure out what caused this plague, what's going on exactly, and that part of the book was really interesting to read about. I did end up giving this 4 stars because I felt like the pacing kind of lulled at times, which is weird because, like I just told you guys, this book is only about 150 pages, so I just expected this book to be a little more fast-paced, a little more exciting the entire time. The ending really was incredible, although I will be upfront with you guys, I did have to look it up on Google what exactly the ending was, because upon first read, I didn't really fully understand what was happening. But yeah, after looking up some analyses on Google, it definitely helped me understand it, and I really loved it. I loved the plot twist, loved the ending. This is a classic sci-fi, and for very good reason. I do highly recommend checking it out for yourself if you haven't read it yet, and especially if you haven't been spoiled for the ending. Also, I do want to quickly mention that this book as a whole, but definitely the ending, gave me really strong Twilight Zone vibes. If you know the old TV show from the 1960s, The Twilight Zone, this book definitely reminded me of that. So if you want those vibes, definitely check out this book. Next book I want to discuss is Dreadnation by Justina Ireland. This is book 1 in a YA speculative fiction / historical fiction duology. So this book is essentially the Civil War meets zombies. So in this world, while the Civil War was going on, zombies just started sprouting up in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And so it essentially derailed the whole war because everybody had to start fighting against these zombies. But because zombies are running rampant, there is a law called the Negro and Native Re-Education Act that requires Black children and Native American children to go into these combat schools so that they can learn to fight the zombies for the white people, essentially. You know what? That oddly sounds realistic to me. I feel like if zombies really did start sprouting up during the Civil War, that white people would make everybody else fight their battles for them. But what's really cool is that this fictional school system is based on the very real school system of, there were these boarding schools that started in the 1860s where white people were taking Native American children from their families and putting them in these boarding schools to civilize them, and I think this went on well into the 1900s. So what's really great about this book as well is that we have all Black main characters. So we have Jane McKean, she and this girl Catherine, who is our other pretty major character. They are both at this combat school studying to become an attendant, and basically attendants are bodyguards and zombie slayers that they specifically work for elite white women to protect them. And so the plot goes on from there. I really loved how Justina Ireland really tackled the racial tensions of the time while also incorporating zombies pretty seamlessly, in my opinion. I feel like it all worked really well together. Also, I really enjoyed that in conjunction with these characters being ethnically diverse. Jane is bisexual and Catherine, as far as we can tell, is asexual, so I love that representation as well. The only reason why I'm not giving this 5 stars, I'm giving it a solid 4-star rating. I did feel like the pacing wasn't perfect for me. I just feel like there were too many times throughout this book where not a ton was happening. I just expected more zombie fighting. I don't know, I just kind of feel like the author could have written this better in some aspects. So it is still a very solid 4-star rating for me. I am planning on checking out the second book in the duology because after the way that this book ended, I'm really curious to see how the duology as a whole ends. Next up is a book that I literally just finished right before pressing record. While I was doing my makeup, I was finishing up the audiobook for this, and that is The Troop by Nick Cutter. Let me start things off by saying that this is definitely a horror novel, so buckle up, kids. This is essentially Lord of the Flies meets that movie 28 Days Later. So we are essentially centering around this Boy Scout troop, and there's only 5 boys in the troop, and we have the Scoutmaster Tim, who is a local doctor, and they take this yearly trip to this really small island off the coast of Nova Scotia, I think. But things turn south really fast on the island. So this random stranger shows up while they're all just chilling in the cabin, and he's just like extremely hungry, and his body just doesn't look right. Like, he's extremely skinny, and it looks like there's something crawling beneath his skin. And Tim, being a doctor, decides that he's gonna cut open this guy's stomach to see what is wrong with him and to see if he can help him. But it turns out that the man has like these really extreme tapeworms inside of him. And so these worms are really extreme parasites that if there's any cut on your body, they can get into your body and your bloodstream very easily. They reproduce really quickly, and they make the infected person so extremely hungry that they'll start to like eat their own body and just like random objects, whatever's in front of them, because they just have this extreme hunger. And what's really cool is that while we're following the story of the boys and the Scoutmaster on the island, we're also getting details about what this parasite can actually do, what's the backstory, like where it came from and all of that. Also, the ending was really intriguing and kind of open-ended, and I love those kind of endings, especially for creepy / horror stories. I just think it works so well. Like, literally, as the audiobook was ending, I audibly gasped and I was like, oh my god, like, that's really how he decided to end this. Yeah, it was really good. I definitely recommend it. Be warned though that there is a lot of body horror in this, because there's these worms that are crawling all up inside people's bodies, and that's really horrific. But there's also one of the major characters, he likes to torture animals, so there's a few scenes throughout this book where that is depicted, and I just skimmed past them. They're not important for the plot or anything, in my opinion. I definitely recommend this if you're looking for a straight up horror novel, and I'm also really looking forward to checking out more from Nick Cutter. Next up, I have 4 5-star reads to talk about. So the first one is Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. So as you can probably tell from the title, this is a modern Gothic story. It takes place in the 1950s in Mexico. We have our main character Noemi, and she gets this really suspicious letter from her cousin Catalina, who recently got married to this English man, and him and his family live in this little village out in the middle of nowhere in Mexico. When she gets there, she discovers that Catalina's husband, Virgil, his family built this very English style home in the middle of Mexico. It definitely stands out. It definitely doesn't belong there. And the minute she gets there, really weird things start happening, specifically with Virgil and his family. They act really weird towards Noemi from the start, and the way that they treat Catalina is really strange and not right. And you can tell that Catalina is kind of losing her sanity. So this whole story is about Noemi trying to figure out what the hell is going on in this house and with this family. There's definitely huge themes of colonialism, imperialism, as well as eugenics going on. I also want to quickly mention that there is incest going on in the story, although it doesn't happen on the page, but it is talked about, so I would be aware of that. Also, there is quite a bit of gross body horror, especially towards the very end, so I would be aware of that. This book definitely has a very slow burn to it. The buildup of suspense is very slow, but once you get to like that point of no return, it is just so worth it. I love these Gothic stories because the atmosphere is just so eerie and creepy. Also, I enjoyed all of the characters. My favorites were definitely Noemi, our main character, and Virgil, who is Catalina's husband. Also, I want to mention that I will never look at mushrooms the same again because of this book, and I'm gonna leave it at that because I don't want to spoil anything. And this book also gave me Get Out vibes, as well as that video game The Last of Us, and that's simply because of the mushrooms. And again, I'm not going to spoil exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, I just couldn't give this less than 5 stars. I think it's a fantastic Gothic horror. Also, there is a romance in this that I thought was really adorable and sweet. Next up, I want to talk about The Headmaster by Tiffany Rice. I loved this so much. This is like the perfect Gothic romance. It was so good. So this is about our main character Gwen, and she is on her way to drive up to Chicago. She's about to move in with her friend and look for teaching jobs there, but she comes across this small town where there is this elite boarding school called the Marshall School, and so she decides to go there to look for a teaching jobs. And she meets the headmaster, who is Edwin York, and there is an age difference here because I think she's like 25-ish, and I think Edwin's like in his early 40s. 40s, so if you're into that, you will definitely love this romance. And so while there is this romance going on, there's also this weird mystery going on with the school. You know, I just really love this. I feel like at this point, Tiffany Rice can do no wrong in my eyes. I just think she's such a talented writer, and the ending of this was absolutely stunning and beautiful and definitely punched me in the gut. It was just so well done. So well done. I found myself tearing up by the very end. I cannot recommend this enough if you're looking for a gothic slash atmospheric read that also has a really great romance. Tiffany Rice is like the queen of writing a really great smut as well, so you will also find that in this book. My next 5-star read is a very weird one, and that is Bunny by Mona Awad. So this is the weirdest book that I've ever read, and I adored every second of it. So this follows our main character, Samantha. She is in an MFA creative writing program at this very small elite university. And there are these 4 women that are in the MFA program with her that have their own very close-knit clique, and they call each other Bunny, even though that's definitely not their names. That's just like their cute little nickname for each other. And so essentially, Samantha ends up getting entangled up in their little friendship group. And it turns out that they're essentially a cult. It is very weird. There are very strange things happening in this book. I think you have to go into this just going with the flow and just letting things happen that happen on the page. I think if you read too much into it and if you overthink, you will not enjoy this book as much as I did. It is very strange, it is very bizarre, but at the same time, it is so well written in my opinion. Mona Awad has a PhD in creative writing, and you can tell that she knows how to write fiction. Oddly enough, I related to Samantha's character a lot because she's in this very small elite MFA program, and she ends up feeling like her creativity is stifled. She doesn't really feel motivated to write anymore, and I relate to that because I went to a very tiny master's program as well. I went to Rice University and I got my master's of music in vocal performance, and that program is really tiny. It's the cream of the crop, some of the best young singers in the country, but I was definitely at the bottom of the totem pole, if I'm gonna be quite honest with you guys. So I also felt like I was kind of stifled in grad school, and I definitely went into a depression. So I relate a lot to the kinds of things that Samantha is feeling throughout this book. But yeah, just to kind of sum this book up, if Mean Girls meets Heathers meets Dark Academia meets kind of magical realism meets horror aspects appeals to you, then I would definitely check out this book. I thought it was fantastic. And last but not least, I want to discuss Bird Box by Josh Malerman. I really loved this book as well. Couldn't give it less than 5 stars. In case you don't know what this is about, I feel like a lot of you do though, because it's a very popular Netflix movie. But this is also kind of a post-apocalyptic psychological thriller slash horror novel. So essentially in this world, there are these creatures that if anyone sees them, they immediately start going crazy and hurting themselves and others, and they unfortunately end up committing suicide. Now, this is a very mysterious story because nobody knows what these creatures look like, because like I said, if anybody sees them, they end up killing themselves. Nobody knows where they came from. Are they aliens? Are they some other supernatural kind of creature? The main part of the story takes place about 5 years after this sort of outbreak happened, and most people have died from these creatures. And so in the present timeline, 5 years later, Mallory is now on her own with these 2 young children. I think they're both 4 years old. And so she decides to take this very treacherous trip. I think it's a 20-mile trip down the river that flows behind the house that she's been staying at, so that she can get to this compound that has a lot more people, so that she can continue to survive and raise her 2 kids. So that is the gist of the plot. I loved the buildup of suspense in this book. I thought it was phenomenally done. The pacing was amazing. I definitely recommend checking out the book, even if you have watched the Netflix movie, because the movie just can't depict what it's like to be in Mallory's mind. I think that's what's truly unique about this book. And I did end up watching the movie a couple of days ago, and what I noticed is that the book and the movie are 2 very different experiences, not just with, like I said, being in Mallory's mind versus in the movie where you can't be in her mind, but also just elements of the plot are very different between the 2. So I definitely also recommend checking out this book as well, because I think that you will have 2 very different experiences. But yeah, I can't recommend this enough, and I am really looking forward to checking out more from Josh Malerman. I did see that he came out with a sequel to this book actually, which is just called Mallory. I think that came out a couple of months ago if I'm not mistaken, so I definitely plan on checking that one out as well. All right guys, that's going to be it for this weekly wrap up. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Also, you might notice that I'm getting really close to 500 subscribers, and when I reach that milestone, I am definitely planning on doing a little giveaway for you guys, so definitely be on the lookout for that. I would also love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books that I brought up in this video, or if you want to tell me about any books that you've been reading lately. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!